Cook, Barquette, Ponder, and Wolz are very proud of the results they obtain for their clients, but you should know that past results afford no guarantee of future results, that every case is different and must be judged on its own merits, and that the choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely on advertisements. And now, back to Tell Me I Have a Case with Dan Grimm and Matt Glenn.
And we're back for segment 2 of Tell Me I Have a Case, the show where we invite you to take a second look at the world of personal injury law. I'm Matt Glenn alongside Dan Grimm from Cook, Barquette, Ponder, and Wolz. You can find us on the web at www.cbpw-law.com. Today we're talking about distracted driving. In the first segment we covered how each of us has the power to choose to drive without distraction, to choose to put the phone aside, to choose to download the apps on our phones so that our kids aren't distracted by driving, and choose to change the way we care about driving.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why the language we use, that it's a motor vehicle collision, not a motor vehicle crash or accident, I'm sorry. Because it's not an accident. It's a decision to drive distracted or not drive distracted. You know, even police reports some years ago, police reports were referred to as a motor vehicle accident report. And they also decided to change the language to a crash report, because it is, when you get involved in a distracted driving, no matter what it is, you intentionally do it, because you can avoid it if you care to do so.
Yeah, as we said in the first segment, 94% of crashes are caused by human error, which means they're avoidable, which means a human being could take steps to avoid them.
Absolutely.
Now, that's especially true. We talked a lot about car crashes in the first segment, but it's especially true with what we're seeing with 18-wheelers. Every year, about 170,000 people are injured by 18-wheeler crashes. I heard a trucker say once, if you bought it, if you have it in your house, it's because a truck brought it to the store for you. It is the number one way we get goods moved from place to place in this country is with 18-wheelers. And there are, I don't know, how many 18-wheelers are on the road now, Dan?
So there's over 2 million 18-wheelers operating on our roads each year.
Wow.
It's a ton.
And I know there are all sorts of regulations about how far they can go in a day or how much they can drive. What can the average truck driver do in a day?
So, I mean, the average truck driver drives over 100,000 miles per year. And how did they get to that mass amount of mileage is that they look at truck drivers as far as their regs. They can operate for 14 consecutive hours. Of those 14 consecutive hours, they can be driving for 11 of those hours. The other 3 hours are made up by, waiting at weigh stations or waiting to deliver the cargo. But they're on the clock for 14 hours and driving 11 of those hours. Can you imagine?
11 hours. And we're starting to see this. Imagine being at your job for 11 hours and never once looking at your phone. In a lot of our cases, we see truck drivers who are distracted by their cell phone. Now, how do we find that out? Well, we'll obtain the cell phone from them, and we'll actually download the data.
Right.
And this is important for you to know, both when you're driving, your phone is subject to download, but these truck drivers' phones are subject to download too. And that really only works if we get the case really early on, because
Right.
this data resets, these phones get lost, they get replaced. We really need those cases early on, but
Right.
you can download the data, and the data doesn't just show how many calls or text messages were sent from the phone. It actually can show if a video was playing at the time of the crash, or if somebody was scrolling through Twitter or
Right.
social media at the time of the crash. We're starting to see that more and more. As these truck drivers, you got to think they've been driving for 10 years. They feel so comfortable out on the road, and over 11 hours, they get bored, and they get distracted. And they're distracted with 80,000 pounds that they're driving at 75 miles an hour, 40 tons moving down the highway, and they might be watching a video. They might be looking at social media. It's astounding.
Yeah, and the devastation is just horrific. I mean, you have, like I said, 80,000 pound vehicle traveling 55, 65, 75 miles per hour down the roadway, and the average passenger vehicle weighs 2,000 to 3,000 pounds.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not even, it's what they can do to our cars on the roadway when they smash into them at those highway speeds is simply devastating.
Yeah. Yeah, I know you and I have both had a lot of cases we've over the years that involved truck drivers and distracted driving. What were some of your more memorable ones?
Yeah, so some of the ones that come to mind is like there was one that involved, it was a southbound on I-55 right outside of Cape, and it was a Canadian trucking company. And you're starting to see a lot more of this. So you're starting to see a lot of Canadian trucking companies or companies that are based out of Mexico and are using our highways. And this one was out of Canada, and this truck driver was driving at highway speeds, and literally he said he was driving, leaving 1,000 feet in between him and a vehicle in front of him, and that's what they should do. But there was a crash on the other side of the highway, and there was a police car there, and then somehow a dog crossed the highway, and he was watching it the whole time, not keeping his eye on straight ahead on the cars in front of him. And literally, he traveled 1,000 feet, smashed into the back of my client's vehicle because traffic was stopped ahead because this dog crossed over the southbound lane of traffic. So one vehicle stopped, another vehicle stopped, and my client's vehicle stopped. And this truck driver driving, 60, 65, 70 miles per hour, looking at the crash on the other side of the highway, plowed into the back of my client's vehicle, and you can just imagine what happened.
Yeah. Yeah, it can be absolutely devastating. I had a case on southbound 55 where my client was driving his wife to a doctor's appointment. She was 8.5 months pregnant and needed to see her doctor that day. And he started to slow down because he wasn't sure what exit he was supposed to take. And the truck driver had plenty of time to process, whether he needed to slow down or what was going on around him. And instead, he just never did. And he struck this vehicle so hard, it knocked this man and his wife probably 30 yards out of the vehicle and into the median. Unfortunately, it killed Mom on impact.
I can imagine.
And now, fortunately, the ambulance was able to get her to the hospital, and an ER doctor actually delivered the baby. He's actually alive. He actually made it. But just in that moment of distraction, this kid will grow up now without a mom, right? Just because that driver, spent time looking somewhere else, just not processing what was in front of him on the road.
And that's exactly it. And what we're seeing is during these when we take the driver's deposition, and this comes to mind. I have another case that the driver of the tractor trailer truck driver, 18-wheeler, I wanted to ask, what did you see 60 seconds before impact? They don't know.
Yeah.
What were you doing? I don't know. And then literally this case, he plowed through, smashed into the side of my client's vehicle, kept going before slamming on the brakes, and took another 4 vehicles that he smashed into before he came to a complete stop. Mm-hmm. And then when you ask these drivers, what were you doing? Either they readily admit that they were distracted, either on their cell phones, or they say that they don't know. And obviously, there's only one or two scenarios. Either you're on your cell phone or you're asleep. Yeah. And in going back to as far as the hours these truck drivers drive, sleeping is another distraction because it affects your cognitive awareness of what's going on.
Well, these guys are working 14-hour shifts, right? And they're driving for 11 of those hours. I can remember being in college, driving 11 hours to go somewhere. And by the end of those 11 hours, I was tired.
Oh, absolutely.
But I was 22. And I was driving a little Honda. I mean, I was driving something with power steering and that took no effort at all, had cruise control, and didn't, require the sort of braking that a truck drives. These vehicles can weigh up to 80,000 pounds, 40 tons, that they have to keep control of for 11 hours out of a 14-hour shift. These are incredibly difficult jobs. I tell my kids all the time that, look, the vast majority of truck drivers, they know what they're doing. They are absolutely good at their job, but you want to give them the room they need.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? It's a pain in the rear end when you're near a truck and you want to get around them and they're slowing you down because they can't get up the hill that fast. You know what? You're not so important that you can't take an extra 45 seconds and let that truck get up the hill. Give these guys the space they need because the attentive ones will be able to avoid you. But the inattentive ones, the ones who get distracted, they can create real problems real fast.
Yeah, and the weight matters because the distance we talked about, driving a passenger car, traveling at 55 miles per hour, we can slam on our brakes and stop at 255 feet. That's not the case when you're traveling in an 18-wheeler that's fully loaded at 80,000 pounds. It's going to take 3 times as long for you to be able to stop your vehicle. Right. That's why truck drivers should be looking 1,000 feet down the roadway because it takes that long to slam on your brakes and bring your truck to a full and complete stop.
Right.
And that's what, like I said, I'm the same way. Like I'm super paranoid now. So if I see a truck behind me, I'll make sure I get out of his way. I'm way in front of him. And even if we're stopped in traffic or a highway, I'm super paranoid as far as if a truck is coming up behind me, because these drivers, if they're not paying attention, they're driving distracted, cannot stop in time. And that's what we've seen time and time again in our cases.
Yeah, I've told my kids this, that if you're ever on the interstate, I don't care if you're in rush hour traffic in St. Louis or if you're, on I-55 in a rural area, if you have to start coming to a stop, as soon as you're sure the people in front of you, you're not going to hit them, your next look is in that rearview mirror to see who's behind you, because it is infinitely better to take your car and steer it into the median than it is to get struck by an 80,000-pound vehicle going 75 miles an hour.
Absolutely. And you talked about the ECM downloads, which is a black box that's inside the truck that it provides data as far as when the truck driver started braking, the speed he was at when he started braking. Also, you mentioned the cell phone data is important. And the reason why it's important also to get that information to us early is because we can actually do things to affect change in the community. Yeah. Part of the things we do when we handle civil litigation cases also with these trucking companies is to provide and mandate change within their company. Companies now are starting to have devices that block cell phones in their vehicle. You start to see now more trucking companies are having inside cameras on their drivers as well as outside cameras in the vehicle, so they can see what's in front of them and see what the driver's doing at the time of the crash.
Yeah, a lot of times you can see what the driver saw as he was approaching it. I had a case once where we did exactly that. We downloaded the ECM data. That basically shows every hard brake that this truck had for the previous 60 days that it had been in use. Every sort of event. Anytime that he slammed on his brakes, we caught that. Anytime that he exceeded the speed limit by a certain miles per hour, it recorded that. And we were able to show that this truck driver, during the 60 days prior to our accident, had at one point gone 88 miles an hour. Mm-hmm. Now, I remember saying to his lawyer, unless he's trying to activate the flux capacitor and go back to 1955, there is not a reason for a truck to be going 88 miles an hour on our roadways ever. We highlighted that data for him, and we put the safety officer, chief safety officer of that company in a deposition, and we made him answer those questions. Right. Is it acceptable ever for a truck driver to go 88 miles an hour? He had to answer no. Is it acceptable for this number of hard brakes to happen for this type of a truck driver? He had to answer no. And he caused a really bad accident by being inattentive. That was the last time he drove a truck. Right? That was it. He never drove a truck. He was still employed at the time we took his deposition, took the safety officer's deposition. After that, he never drove a truck again. And you know what? He doesn't need to.
And that's a great point. I mean, this information, one presented, through litigation, allows us to get these dangerous drivers off the roadway. Yeah. But it also, what it does, it allows us to go to the companies and allows the companies to use this data to provide for better training, better safety within the company, better safety culture, because now they have data that can advise them what's wrong and how to fix it.
Well, many times it's our questioning of the safety officer that'll lead them to a different conclusion. I have a very good friend who's actually a chief counsel for a trucking company, and he talks about how every time they get sued, they tend to alter how they train their drivers. Right. Because you never know. There are a million different ways that a driver could do this better. And right. And the good companies out there, the good drivers out there, they learn from their mistakes. But they have to have those mistakes brought to them, and that's one of the things we can do.
And it's so important because our roadways, like we talked about, are shared by our children, our wives, our family members, our loved ones, and we all have to share these roadways together. Yeah. And really, what I would say back in the 80s and 90s, which the epidemic was drinking and driving, we're now seeing that same epidemic pop up with distracted driving. And so everything we can do to not only teach our children, this makes the road safer for everybody, just like as far as the information that we're providing to trucking companies, as far as data, is important to make it safer for them to operate on our roadways.
Yeah, the cell phones have really done it. The fact that everyone has a smartphone, everyone has that distraction right next to them in their car. We've given you hopefully some strategies to help your kids avoid distracted driving. If you would like to, www.cbpw-law.com. You can go to our website and you can contact us. There'll be a form there if you want your kid's school to have a distracted driving seminar. We're happy to make that happen. Thank you once again for listening to Tell Me I Have a Case. I'm Matt Glenn along with Dan Grimm. We appreciate you being with us. You can find us at cbpw-law.com.
You've been listening to Tell Me I Have a Case with Dan Grimm and Matt Glenn. If you have questions and need answers, contact Cook, Barquette, Ponder, and Wolves today. Just go to cbpw-law.com. See you next week for Tell Me I Have a Case. The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and shouldn't be based solely on advertisements.